to see you.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
What's up, guys?
Hello. How are
Welcome,
you?
welcome. Hi, Arnetta. Hi, JR. Andrew, nice to meet you for the first time, buddy.
Yeah,
Good to
nice
see you. I just came in. I was up at a retreat. Some of our churches from Northern California and Central California gathered together up in the foothills. And so I went up to visit earlier today and kind of just sped in and got the laptop up and running. So glad to be with you guys here. So, well, hey, while we're waiting, Emily will be with us. I talked with Pastor Paul earlier today, Paul Binion. He's not going to be able to be on. He's traveling from LA back to Fresno. So he's going to be on the road during this call. He wanted to send his regrets and apologies. He'll be back on, he says, next week with us. So let's just do a little bit. Andrew, I don't know you yet, and so I'd love to get the chance to be able to hear a little bit about like how we've gotten here. And then Arnetta, I know that last week, both JR and I, or 2 weeks ago, JR and I and Emily got a chance to hear from one another. I'd love to hear a little bit too of like what brings you to this point to be on this call too. So I'll start off since I'm leading things out here and could just give you guys a little bit of context about who I am and kind of what I'm doing that way. So Michael Guzman. I lead Church of God of Exeter, which is in Exeter, California, in Central California between Fresno and Bakersfield. I've grown up here in this area, grew up actually kind of in this church, so to speak, and then now lead the church, which is kind of an interesting, ironic thing. And then I also oversee the region of churches in Central California now. I've been doing that for the last year's time frame. So I'm the regional pastor. I do that part-time, and so, I designate really probably about a day and a half worth of time per week to that. Loads of fun, and it's been great connecting that way. I also do then this 3DM huddles, where I'm in an official capacity as a 3DM coach. There's a lot of that crossover, so we operate off of a 3DM DNA at Church of God of Exeter in a lot of ways. It's been really helpful for us to be able to even kind of live out of our historical roots of who our tribe and denomination is. And so I get to do lots of coaching calls like this. And this is probably one of my favorite things that I do, where I get to invest in leaders, get to know leaders, and really kind of see, in a sense, like what we're going to be looking at, some simple transferable tools that can be used in loads of different contexts. So I've been married for 17 years. Kimberly is my lovely bride. We met in Riverside, California after I had finished up college, and then we moved back here to my hometown and have been living here for the last 13 years. We've got 3 kids. I've got Zach, who is not mine biologically, but he's my son. He's a 28-year-old, works up in Oregon, so we don't see him quite as often as what we'd like, but he's a journeyman carpenter up there and doing really well. And then we've got Emily and Hannah, 14 and 12. And so we spread quite the age range in kids that way. So I've gone through the teen years, and now I'm getting ready to go through the teen years again with my little ladies. So that's a little bit of context about me. And so how about Andrew? Why don't you start us off, buddy? Just tell us a little bit about who you are. Give us a little ministry context and family stuff too.
Sure. Yeah, my name's Andrew. I'm a pastor in Ontario in Canada. And I've been doing that for, 16 years now, something like that.
Nice.
And I'm in a church that's just recently, where I've just transitioned to be the lead pastor, where they had somebody there who was there for 43 years and founded the church. And then, I just started in January then officially as the lead. So that's been new for us. That involved a move for our family. And I have a wife and 3 kids. My wife is in full-time school right now and working to be a midwife, so she's doing that. And then I have 3 kids who are 8, 5, and 3. So our house is a busy little house often, and you might hear them in the background at some point. I'm at home right now. And then, I got connected to 3DM in and through Bob. I was on a pilgrimage with him, and he suggested that, I kind of connect and maybe come forward and kind of continue on with it, because I really enjoyed that and learning about that stuff. So that's me.
Awesome. That's really cool. So you did Footsteps of Jesus. Is that the one, or Footsteps of Paul?
Footsteps of.
Nice. That's really cool. I long to go on that trip sometime in the future. Everybody that I hear that's gone on any of those just has rave reviews about it. So I can't wait. Bob keeps bugging me about it too. Like, hey, you need to come. And so the years keep getting put out a little bit and further. So maybe 2020 might be a time for me. Hey, welcome, Emily. Good to have you on the call with us. We're just hearing a little bit from Andrew. He's up in Ontario, Canada, just taken over the lead pastor role at his church. He's been married, I don't remember the number of years, 18, 19. How many years, Andrew?
I've only been married 13, been pastoring for 16.
That's okay. There we go. And then 3 kiddos. So, Arnetta, why don't you give us a little bit of a lowdown? Tell us your ministry context, about your family, and then what leads you to be on the call here today.
Okay, Arnetta Bailey. I serve with Christian Women Connection as executive director. I've CWC. I've been with the ministry now 16 years, and sort of in a season of transition. I have 3 children: a daughter that's 39, son 28, and one 26. And let's see, love ministry. I've been in ministry now about 30 years. And what led me to this call, a conversation with Huddle and just talking about where I am and where I want to go, not necessarily just in the context of CWC, but just looking at ministry as a whole, some of the frustrations that I face, and he just thought this would be a good group for me. And Michael, you and I connected when we served together, and was just very impressed by some things that you said around the table. So when I found out that this was a huddle that you actually led, I thought, yes, I think that I could probably benefit from this relationship.
I appreciate that, Arnetta.
That's why I'm here. But let me just make some apologies up front. I am actually in Dallas right now. I had to attend a funeral that was today. So I am actually right now at the home of Cynthia James, and I pulled away because I did not want to miss this meeting again. So if I have to leave early, please excuse me, because I'm not at home. I'm in someone's home, and I want to be sensitive of doing this when I'm not in my own space. I am so honored to be a part of this and just can't wait.
Awesome. Good to have you here, Arnetta. Can't wait. In fact, I think Hondo has played a part with both JR, you being here, and Arnetta as well. And so thankful for his ministry. The call that I'm on with Hondo, we're probably about 6 huddles away from wrapping up. So we've been on a 6-month journey. And so that's been real cool. So both JR and Emily, if you don't mind, I'm going to leave your introductions in the recording. And so both Andrew and Arnetta, if you went back to the previous email that I had sent, there's a recording in there, and that'll give you a chance to be able to hear directly from them without having to feel the time pressure that they might feel if I put them on the spot right now to kind of share some of theirs. And so jump in and hear some of those stories that way. Each one of our calls I'll record that way, and then I'll publicize it. I do publicize it in a way so that it's unlisted on Facebook. So though I store them there, that just allows me storage capacity. It's unlisted. Other people can't find it unless we happen to share the link with somebody. And so if you will, keep that confidential just amongst us that way. Okay. All right, guys. Well, here's where we're going to go today. So this is our first official huddle where we're using the coaching framework for the on-ramp huddle. And so we've got a reading assignment that will be somewhat typical. We'll do basically 3-week modules where we'll do a week like today, which is a content huddle. That's where we're going to have fresh reading. We'll dialogue about that reading. Let that be something that provokes, new ideas or thoughts, or maybe even pushback and argument that we'll, discuss together. And then in a content huddle, usually we'll do really well to kind of walk out with some sense of idea that I think that the Lord might be saying this to me today out of this one. Then we'll do, in the second week of a module, we'll do a character huddle where we'll take some of the same ideas and content from those chapters, but we'll begin to apply it much more specifically to our own lives. On those huddles, we'll get really good at pretty soon answering the 2 key questions that every huddle does. What's God saying to me? What am I going to do about it? So we'll start practicing that. You'll see those rhythms coming about. And just the simple ways that simple accountability will play into it. And then in the third week of a module, we'll go through what do we call it? there's two different terms that I use, a leadership content. So we'll take the same stuff, but we'll apply it from our lenses as leaders of other people. Some of us, it may be direct application into our own family unit, because those are our primary people that we're called to disciple. Of course, because of our different ministry contexts, we're going to think about the ministries that we're leading, the churches that we're leading, the movements that we're leading that way. So we'll look at it from that angle. We'll go through multiple modules like that, with kind of chewing on, a few chapters at a time. And overall, again, the two key questions that we're always wrestling with in Huddle is, what is it that God seems to be saying to me? What will I do about it? And so we'll jump into that, and that'll be much more familiar language as we keep going. So since today's a content huddle, what I'll do is I'll do an overview of chapters 1 to 3. I'll kind of summarize and walk through that. I've got it on my iPad here on Kindle, and so I'll flip through and do a verbal summary of it, just to lay the playing field and kind of refresh all of our memory. And then we'll do just a discussion. Hey, what caught your attention from there? Maybe a quote that stood out to you. All of that's going to give me feedback to see where to be able to help lead the conversation. And then from there, we don't have a tool today. Usually there'll be a specific tool, a discipleship tool that we'll look at. We don't have one today, so it'll probably be very discussion rich in that regard. So before we jump into the summary, any questions or anything that I can clarify?
Good.
Perfecto. All right, let me flip back to the beginning. I was just reviewing it right before I got on with you guys. So Andrew mentioned Bob Ronglian. He's the author of the book. Bob leads, besides writing books, he pastored a church in kind of the Los Angeles area for many years, a Lutheran church there. I became friends with him back in 2010 when I went to a 3DM event that his church was hosting. And both he and Pam, oh man, I've become fast friends of Kimberly and I. We love them. They've invested so much into our lives. Really, I've received so much by way of discipleship from him. And so, man, I count it a privilege to not only be looking at and using his book as a tool here, but to know him and to know him real well that way. And so he's the author of the book. He leads 3DM West. And so I work with him, helping to establish coaching kind of in the western part of the hemisphere, or western part of the US and Canada. And so help out with all of that, just to give a little context to the book. So Bob, my friend, starts off chapter 1 with joining a movement. And he begins to, in all of these chapters, kind of lays this big historical arc of what's going on in Christendom and kind of where we are today. So he uses this example about his building past, that he was trained and taught how to be able to build houses, because he has a carpentry background. But he didn't do it by reading textbooks. He learned it by watching somebody do it and then imitating what they did. He says all of that to kind of talk about what is it that you're building with your life and with your ministry. And that he likens it then kind of in Christian circles, in ministry circles, that oftentimes it's not that we read a text and then try to build something in the church, that many times what's missing is that apprenticeship idea, that we learn from somebody who's a couple of steps ahead of us. So he asks a couple questions. I'm just reading some quotes from here. Do you have the materials you need? Do you have the tools required? Is there someone in your life more experienced than you showing how to be able to do it? All of those, of course, apply in his carpentry example, but they apply into the ministry as well. He begins to go on and explain how he went through ministry, seminary degree, all of those things, and then started to do what he was doing, but felt like even though he had been successful in so many ways of Christian circles, he was writing books, he was speaking in public venues, people were beginning to request his voice to be at their conferences, but he just felt like something was missing in there. So he says, we were trying to build what the blueprint showed us, but we had inadequate tools, substandard materials, and no mentoring by those who knew how to do it. It was just copying and looking for innovation after innovation, a lot like happens in our free market kind of realm. So then he goes into the segment, building a movement. He said, Jesus never called his followers to attend church services and activities. Instead, he modeled a way of life for us and called us to follow that by his grace, likening it to the apprenticeship model. So he begins to explain how he went to Africa and saw this this church community that walked in simple authority and power, even though they didn't have the educational background that he had invested so much in. They really walked in a lot of authority and power, like the way of Jesus. He then talks about how that led him to go and explore a church in England called St. Thomas in Sheffield, where Mike Breen was the pastor. Mike Breen is the overall kind of founder and leader of 3D movements or 3D movements. And he said when he went there, he saw something similar that he had seen in Africa, where he gives even this example of this janitor that they came across, who really quickly explained this kind of deep and profound insight that he had. And they learned so much as these highly educated pastors from the janitor. And so I love this quote. He says, "This is the kind of fruit Jesus talked about, a community of disciples who are discipling others, so everyone, from the pastors to the janitors, is equipped to carry out the mission of Jesus." And it really had this deep impact upon him, where he then came back and said, we've got to do this. And I mean, I've heard so much the stories of how he began to implement this, and then everything went wrong. It didn't, everything's going to change. And then it didn't work. And so another quote here, he says, "I assumed that this journey was going to be about changing my church," which was a motivator in his life. But I discovered first and foremost, it's about God changing me. And I mean, so often that's, the thing that happens in all of our lives. And so it explains a little bit more about 3D movements and how he began to be a part of it. So now in chapters 2 and 3, this is where he gets now a broader historical perspective. So he talks about feudalism. So it's kind of like we go into history class for a little while. It talks about how feudal lords who owned land had serfs who worked the land. The serfs didn't own anything, but they worked the land for the feudal lord, and then the feudal lord would provide for them kind of out of the overflow of everything that was happening. So ownership was in the hands of some, but work and resource were in the hands of the many more. That this actually worked, if we know our history, that system worked for a while until stresses came on it. If war broke out, then the feudal lord would say, "Send me all of your sons because we're going to battle, because I've got an argument going on over a card game that went awry with another feudal lord neighboring." And the serfs didn't quite like sending their sons away and seeing them not come home again. So those would be areas of disruption where the system worked, but it didn't work in those places. Also didn't work in famine, like when the land just didn't produce. No matter how hard the serfs worked, they came up with meager fruitfulness from the land. They would come knocking because the feudal lord promised to provide for them and to take care of them. But in famine, they said, "Hey, where's what you promised us?" And they would oftentimes rise up, even eventually, with pitchfork in hand and torches in hand, to say, "This isn't right." So much of what we saw, in the French Revolution, in what happened in England, and then even the formation of the United States, even formed out of that cultural context in there. I don't know, Andrew, that I could speak too much to the foundation of Canadian history that way. Maybe you could inform us there. Bob's kind of, primarily speaking to a U.S. audience in that realm. But he says that from there, that what happened is, if you look and contrast that idea to how Jesus lived, Jesus said that, the disciples were to, there's a lengthy quote here, but he says that he spoke to the crowds and then called people into relationship with him, equipped them to do the things that he did. He was wanting to make producers, not necessarily more people to take care of his land. He wanted individuals to go do what he did. He wanted to release and empower them. But then what happens is that though we see that in Jesus in the book of Acts, it seems like when we look back further into Christian history, we don't really see this powerful, authoritative, movemental group of people. We see it in little sprigs here and there, with different movements maybe start and rise up. But we largely see almost a social contract in a spiritual way, where we've got spiritual feudal lords and we've got spiritual serfs, where we've got people who are clergy and we've got people who are laity. We've got people who are paid professionals, and we've got people who are church attenders. We've got people who know the Word of God and people who don't know the Word of God. We've got people who provide spiritual goods, and we've got people who largely receive spiritual goods. And in a lot of ways, in American and Northern, Western context, that contract has worked relatively well in a lot of ways. But it seems like Bob was getting at, there was an itch that man, are we missing something? What about the priesthood of all believers? What about the idea that Jesus said, let me see if I can find this quote here. This comes from Luke. I'm now in chapter 3. Where did it go? Maybe I missed it already when I passed through. One way or the other, I can quote it for you. He's in the upper room with the disciples, and he's telling them, they're arguing over who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. Like, it's going to be me. No, it's going to be me. And he says, hey, in the Roman world that they lived in, there are benefactors, and they provide for the people. They're called benefactors. It's not to be that way amongst you. He described a completely different paradigm. He said, I came here not as one to be served, but I came here as one who is serving. And he meant to produce, a group of people who were going on and producing great things. And so that's kind of where chapter 3 hinge comes into play. Further on in historical context, that kind of Roman system that had all of these different stratas of society. By the time the early church, from kind of the day of Pentecost all the way up into the Edict of Milan, influenced the world, and they were the underdogs of all of society. They were persecuted. They were not allowed to flourish in public spaces, and yet the church, some estimates say that over half of the population of the Roman Empire had become followers of Jesus, with this underprivileged, under-resourced movement of people filled with the Holy Spirit. And so Edict of Milan, Constantine says, man, I've got a problem on my hands. This is my shorthand history lesson right there. I don't know that he quite said it like that, but he says, I think we're losing. So he dubs Christianity to be a state religion, and then he takes the power and influence of the Christian church and pours it into the mold of the Roman Empire. And now we've got the Roman Catholic Church that looks and operates just like everything else in Rome, but it's somehow spiritual. And it begins to lose the vitality. It begins to lose the effectiveness and the power. It's got power, but now it's, again, in the hands of certain people and excluded from the hands of others. Jesus created a movement of everyday people doing amazing things because he called them into family and empowered them to do what he had called them to do. So that's kind of my loose summary of chapters 1, 2, and 3. Love to hear from you guys. What was it from those chapters that caught your attention the most? Maybe it could be a quote again. Maybe it was an idea or a concept. Could be brand new content. It could be something, man, I've been thinking about this for a while, and that book echoed what thoughts have been in my mind and heart. How about we'll start with Emily. Why don't you go first? You are on mute still. Oh no. Here, let me see. I think I can take you off. Well, it's not letting me. Why don't you see what you can do to be able to get it charged up? Oh, there we go. Nice. You know what? Now what's funny is your sound is not coming through. Oh no. Why don't you see what you can on the bottom of your screen? Kind of there's the mute segment there. If the little arrow allows you to kind of tell where you're getting your sound coming from. See if you can play around from that while I move to somebody else, and then I'll circle back to you, okay? Andrew, I'll go with you then, buddy. What is it that catches your attention from those chapters?
I think the thing that caught my attention was just how easily it was for that feudal kind of bit to slip into like capitalism and consumerism. Yeah. How it's so easy then for us to get into the role of, like, I'm a paid pastor, right? So like as a professional, my job is to somehow give to you what you need, rather than, my job is to form you in such a way that we shape the world and what it needs, like Jesus and what he has to bring. And that's the thing that really just struck me, is how easy it is for consumerism to really shape and mold spiritual things, and to really take away that, like you said, the vitality of it, or the real meaning and power kind of behind it. And it still retains some of that, but it's so easy to just be like, to not even see it. It can be really subtle how that can happen.
Yep. Yeah, because I think what you're describing is this is our normal, and our normal feels normal. And we then read the Bible and we try to, take the Bible and put it into our lives. But yeah, that's a lot largely the construct that we've got going on these days. I think sometimes too, we feed into that where we allow people to continue to, take up, there's different terms we'll use, pew sitters, or, even, a good Christian person, comes to church regularly, contributes financially, serves and is involved in ministry. But when I look at that standard of what oftentimes we would say would be somewhat success, if I compare that to the book of Acts, those oftentimes look very different from one another. So yeah, good stuff, Andrew. Thanks for sharing that. Arnetta, what about you? What is it that catches your attention?
I think for me, I highlighted the same quote that you did. This kind of fruit Jesus talked about as a community of disciples, discipling everyone. But then as I got over into the third chapter, I thought about how I spend so much time in ministry, trying to create a ministry that will please everyone.
Yeah.
I'm constantly, we're doing surveys. We're constantly asking, well, what do you want? We're always trying to keep people happy, trying to keep that partnership rather than making disciples, because it's never really about going out. We say that ultimately it's about going out, but it's really not. It's just trying to keep them in, you know, and it's so frustrating because when do we ever get to the point where we are actually practicing discipleship? We talk about it, but we're not really doing it, because if I don't make you happy, then you're off to something else.
Yeah.
And so this just really struck me. So that was
that's good.
And that's the thing that jumped out at me.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so often there's compromise that enters into that equation, like you're saying. When will we get to the discipleship stuff, which when we look at the Great Commission, that's the stuff that Jesus said we were to do. Go, make disciples, baptize them, teach them to obey all the things that I've taught you. I'll be with you to the end. He was the one that said he would build his church. But I think sometimes we think we're in the church building business versus the disciple making business. And man, I mean, I'm not saying that in any condemning way, because I get this. Just like Andrew says, this is the water that I'm swimming in too. It's oftentimes so hard, and it feels like a lot of things get in the way of that big thing that Jesus is ultimately going to count. How many disciples are you making?
Absolutely. And I don't want to make it seem like it's a criticism, because we are trying to equip. But then at what point do we just share Jesus and allow that to happen?
Absolutely.
We're going from just one program to the next. And after a while, when do we stop that? And when do we see it's time to move forward? Yeah,
because I think, when I look at Jesus' life, where, feeding of the 5,000, the miracle that's included in all of the gospel accounts, he fed 5,000 family units is what he fed. And I mean, it's an amazing time. Seems like the largest crowds that he had, or at least a picture of those large crowds. And then he gives the hardest teaching, hey, eat my body and drink my blood. And everybody leaves. Everybody leaves to the point where just his disciples are there. And then he turns to them and says, what about you guys? Are you guys going to go too? And I'm thinking, wow, we don't lead like that. We're trying to keep the 5,000 family units here. And we don't want to bring challenge like he's bringing in that. And so, I mean, there's so much we can talk about in there, but yep, I hear you in that. Emily, how's it working? Is sound working on your end now?
Yeah, I think so. Can you hear me?
Yep,
okay.
You're good to go. All right. What was it that caught your attention?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm pretty new into this position. It's only been about a month. And so I really feel like through 3DM, I'm like sort of retraining my brain to not think in like the old school way, not the old school way, the feudalistic way of ministry, and to really start to think how to walk as servant, and how to walk in empowering the other people that are part of my team. And it's hard. So I'm just anxious to learn some of these tools. I liked when he said, when he was working construction, he didn't go to school to do construction. He joined a crew.
Yep.
And that's kind of where I feel like I'm at right now. I really feel like I'm sitting here with my clipboard, looking at the other workers, trying to figure out, how are we doing this? How is it supposed to work? Because it's hard. And we've had, people leave, and we have people in our church that are pew pew sitters and that are not, and trying to find the discernment between, how to do those things. I feel like I'm already applying it, but.
Yep. Awesome. That's good stuff. One of the things too that I found that has been really helpful is that if I'm going to posture myself like an apprentice to somebody, that doesn't mean that they're a master and they know everything and I know nothing. It may mean that I'm more skilled in some areas than they are, but in some areas they're more skilled than I am, and I need to learn from those parts. But if I posture myself as an apprentice, usually an apprentice is going to do what you said, observe and watch very intently. But I've had to learn, besides just watching, I need to ask good questions. Because many times somebody who's efficient at what they do and effective doesn't always know how to explain how they do it and why they do it. So as somebody who's an apprentice learner, I've got to ask questions that draw out all of the gold. So if I get with Bob Brongley and if I get with other leaders that I love to be with, oftentimes I'll ask those questions like, hey, so tell me how it is that you let the Bible be a central part of your life. What's that look like on a real daily basis for you? Because it's those kind of questions that allow for the answers to be given. Most people don't walk around saying, hey, since you're here, let me explain to you how I read the Bible. There's almost a presumptuousness that comes out there. So observe and ask good questions. That's always been a really good one. So JR, what about you? What's catching your attention from the book?
Well, on page 36 there, in the third chapter, Cole makes has this quote, and he says, apparently the world is interested in Jesus. It is his wife that they do not want to spend time with.
Yeah.
And then it says many people who are fascinated with Jesus are no longer willing to engage with the bride of Christ because we have strayed so far from the life that Jesus modeled for us.
Yeah.
So we're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
We're doing something wrong. That people are still, they're like, Jesus is awesome. I like that guy.
Yeah.
But the bride,
yeah,
kind of wacky. And
yeah.
so I don't know another adjective. I could have picked a better adjective, I guess. But, that's what they're looking at the bride like, you're tore up,
Yeah.
I don't know that you are anything close to the groom.
Yep.
That's so I'm looking at that's what really caught my attention out of those 3 chapters, that the wife is nowhere, that the wife doesn't look like that the bride doesn't look like Jesus.
Yeah, I hear you. And I was going to say, I'm thinking too, man, how many conversations have I had where people want to get closer to God, but they're like, I don't know if I want to go to church. I've been hurt by the church. I mean, how many, I find that the more that I spend time with other pastors and leaders, oftentimes, their spouse, comes to hate and resent the church. Oftentimes their children and their grandchildren felt like they played second place to the church. There's just a lot of different church hurts that people experience along the way. That's kind of what I was thinking about in light of what you were saying there too. Yeah, if we looked and lived like Jesus, it would be giving life wherever we go. But oftentimes it's the opposite response there. But I know we've gone around and kind of shared different things. What else is kind of catching your attention from this chapter besides that? Or maybe even springing off of, like maybe you got an amen. Man, Arnetta said this, and I hear you. Let's just, we're kind of dialoguing, but just with a little bit of structure behind it. Somebody else jump in.
I was going to amen Arnetta, actually, for what you had said. So,
what part in particular?
Yeah, when you talked about like your that we as a people pleaser, right? That's what we tend to do in the church, is look for like, how can I fill you up, right? How can I meet your needs? And I think he talked about that, and I think that's something I'm beginning to even struggle with. Is it's such a quick burnout when we live our life that way and when we do ministry that way. But it's a brain change of, like it's not about that. It's not about filling the seats. It's not about pleasing. It's about following what Jesus did. So it spoke something to me, what he said.
Yep. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, and I think it has to do with like what product are we looking to produce? You know, Jesus made disciples and then taught and trained those disciples to make more disciples. Whereas oftentimes I think we're content with just having attenders. And I know that we, like Arnetta had said this, we want people to grow. That's what we're really trying to get. But oftentimes, you know, Mike Breen has this quote, you can build the church and you may get disciples, but if you make disciples, you will always get the church. It takes a little bit longer, but I think oftentimes we compromise and sacrifice one for the other. And then, you know, Andrew said this, I mean, we get paid in the process. Like, we don't want to disrupt the cart so much that now we're like, we don't even have a job anymore. But yeah, I think that sometimes we get it back in the wrong order. Arnetta, were you going to say something else to that?
Yes, I was. You know, when I first started reading the book, matter of fact, I'm here with my son is in Dallas too. And I've been telling him that he needs to read, you know. And so he said to me, he said, Mom, what are you reading? And I told him this book. I said, and you know what? Even though I think you would be interested in, this is the reason why. For me, I think this journey is about taking me back to my first love. See, I remember when I was first saved and how I wanted to see so many people experience what I had experienced. And especially my friends who didn't know the Lord. And when I first got in ministry, it was just like, I just wanted to share the gospel, you know, and that was just the thing that was paramount before me. But it seems like the deeper I got into ministry, the more I lost that. And I didn't know that I lost it, you know, because I enjoy ministry. But it some sort of way I got away from that first love. And for me, just hearing him talk about his story, that journey, it's almost like I sort of exhaled and thought, finally a book, finally a discussion that will talk about getting back to what's important. Not about church growth and, you know, even though those things are important, and
Yeah.
but just talking about what's that thing that make you want to get up in the morning, that
Yeah.
just, yeah. So, you know, it's not really anything necessarily came out of the book. It's a personal part, but I'm just enjoying just the beginning of this because it's just taking me back to where I was when I first met.
Yeah.
When I got saved. So yeah.
That's awesome. That is great. Somebody else jump into the conversation.
You mentioned taking you back. You look at most leaders, whether they're in the armed services, I think I relate to that more because I served for 20 years in the Marine Corps, but and you look at football teams or football coaches, and there'll come a point where the team is not functional. They're not taking care of their positions. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. And the coach says, that's it. The team leader says, that's it. We're going back to the basics. And I feel that that's exactly what this book is alluding to, that we need to go back to the basics and we need to do what worked. And what worked is the way Jesus did it, the way he led it. And we've gotten so far from that, as you know, everyone has articulated, that you know, we've gotten into programs and trying to make this work, and that doesn't work for this group, and so we don't have small groups for that age group, and you know, who's going to lead that, and just trying to please everybody, instead of it being a place where we gather to worship our Heavenly Father. It becomes a social event, and that's not what the church is supposed to be.
Yeah, that's good. Andrew, you were going to jump in and say something. But you know, it's like your sound is slightly muted for some reason. Try it one
Oh,
more
is
time.
that better?
Yeah, there you go. You're good.
Better? Yeah, I was just going to say, for me, I really resonated with all of that because after my first church, I almost left it just being actually burned out on the programs and the information, as if we thought that somehow what changes people is more information, when our world today has more information than any other generation ever, and we're not seeing the life change. Like, information doesn't lead to life change or transformation. It's getting back to like the basics, like you were saying, of actual like life with people and actually doing the actual practices of Jesus, not just learning about it or hearing more sermons.
Yeah.
And I mean, I give a sermon every single week. I'm not trying to like say they're the worst thing ever, but I also know it's also hasn't made the most dramatic life change in my life or in people around. It's actually journeying with people. So that kind of, at least for me, was part of that book, chapter 2. And what all you're just kind of saying, it just reminded me of that focus that sometimes has been missed.
And then you think about how many hours we invest in that one product of the sermon, and so we invest time and energy to make it good and quality. And yet we're, I would state the same thing. It is effective and helpful, but not maybe as much as in terms of like the amount of time and energy that I put in. And so whereas I find spaces like this, when I'm in a huddle and receiving this, where I can ask questions and interact and grow, or where I'm leading a huddle, this, I've had to reorient my life. My life used to not allow for this kind of thing because it was busy and fast paced. I couldn't do it. But now, I've structured a life where, wait, if I'm called to make disciples, Huddle is a vehicle that I use for disciple making or for investment and coaching. I'm going to do that at the local level, at the regional level, at national levels that way. So, all right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up these questions. There's going to be a chat bar. It shows up different for everybody else depending upon what kind of device that you're on. Arnetta, it looks like you might be on a phone. I'm not sure how that shows up there because I usually am on a laptop. Can you see those questions? No, you're on mute right now. Let me put you.
Yes, it popped up and then it disappeared.
Oh, it disappeared. Yeah, see if you can find that. I can't remember how to coach you to find that from whatever device you're on. I'll read them too, but I know that sometimes it's better to be able to see it in front of you. So get that chat bar up, and then what we'll use is we'll use these questions to kind of wrap up our conversation or move toward wrapping up. So here's number 1. Do I have the tools I need to build what God is calling me to build? You can see where that's sourced out of kind of the content of those chapters. 2, am I functioning like a spiritual Lord? That might be a convicting statement, but something that the Lord's leading you in. 3, am I carrying baggage from the feudal system? We've heard a little bit about that in some ways through our conversations. 4, am I leading in a way that actually encourages spiritual consumerism? Like, am I playing a part? Maybe even identifying some of those maybe habits or activities. Is my way of life shaped more by my current church culture than my Jesus way of life? I remember really JR saying something about that. What will I have to prune to embrace Jesus way of life? Because oftentimes we can't just add more in. We need to cut something away. And last one, am I willing to do what is necessary to learn how to make disciples the way Jesus did? Which one of those questions catches your attention the most? It's kind of just a way for us to be able to find out what the Lord might be saying to us. So I'm just going to go around. Why don't you share which question it is that catches your attention? And then we'll use that to be able to lead toward what it seems like God might be saying to us. So I'll go back to my original first starting point. Emily, what about you? Which one of those questions most catches your attention?
I think for me, looking at, am I leading in a way that encourages spiritual consumerism? Just looking at the group of women, honestly, that I have around me right now in this new ministry, and how am I allowing them to be empowered and not just me to step in and just meet their needs. So that's a question that sticks out to me. Yeah.
That's really good. Yeah, because I think in the situation that you're in, it could be easy for them to go, Emily's here, great. She's going to lead and make all these decisions. And I'm sure they'll serve and they'll help, but you're asking the question, how do I empower them so that we're all doing this stuff? That's good. Arnetta, what about you? Which one of those questions grabs your attention the most?
What will I have to prune in order to I can't bring it up, and I'm trying to bring. But what will I have to prune?
Yep.
That's the question. Yeah, that really sticks out for me. What are those things I need to take away? In order to make this happen.
Does any one thing in particular rise to the surface when you think about that question?
Busyness.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. JR, what about you? Which one of these questions catches your attention the most?
It says, is my way of life shaped more by current church culture than by Jesus' way of life? And my answer is I'm definitely a product of church culture, but I'm going through links to change that image in a congregation that is a byproduct of church culture.
Yeah. 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 So you're trying to grow in your own right, and yet you feel all the kind of pressure from the church community itself that's used to that normal church culture life. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Andrew, what about you? Which one of these questions most grabs your attention?
So for me, it's probably the same ones that Emily and Arnetta shared about, that, am I leading in a way that encourages spiritual consumerism? For me, it would be like, yes, I think that's how I am leading in lots of ways. So these are the question of what do I have to prune to then embrace Jesus' way of life? So it's kind of those two are the ones that are kind of linked for me and lead into one another.
That's great. Good stuff. I think, let me circle back to, Andrew, I'll go back to you. So I'd love to just hear a little bit more about that. So I like the way that you're using those two questions together. You're seeing one almost as the initiator. Am I leading in a way that encourages spiritual consumerism? Yes, I am. So what will need to be pruned away? Why don't you unpack that a little bit more? Tell us some of the things that are coming to mind when you think about, here's what I'm doing, here's what needs to be pruned, because I think that'll be helpful for everyone to be able to hear all together.
Sure. So for me, I'm a part of a church that's quite a kind of a system, and there's a lot to it that encourages towards spiritual consumerism, not towards discipleship.
Yeah.
And so I know in a lot of the ways, just even me doing my regular job leads into consumerism and not necessarily transformation. And so the things I'm wondering about pruning are, like, for me, it's busyness. Like, I'm going to have to cut out of meetings, and they're going to have to learn to do things without me, which I think is good. But the other big piece that I struggle with, if I'm going to be, I don't know, or at least I'm thinking about moving away from spiritual consumerism, is I don't do well with telling people no, with challenging them and saying it's not about you, even though for so many people in the church, I want to say this isn't about you. It's about people who haven't yet met Jesus, and we need to be making some changes and bringing some of, even what Arnetta said, like some of that challenge in. Or it's hard. I want to please people. I got into being a pastor because I want to help people. And so then it's hard when you know what sometimes helps people the most is to challenge them. And I'm not so great at that. I would prefer to let them continue on in something, even though I know it's not so good.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's kind of what you're looking for, but that's
perfect. No, that's super helpful, because that helps me to understand a little bit more of like what you're facing in there. And so I think, so how about this? When you look at meetings, the potential of pruning meetings, what I heard you say is that I might not be at those meetings and they might still happen. So I'd love to just maybe push on that a little bit more. Do you think that's feasible, or do you think that the meetings themselves might get cut even? Tease that out a little bit further.
Sure. I guess the challenge for me is I'm new in my role, and I am seeking to move the church to be more disciple making, but I'm also trying to pace the change.
Yeah, right.
Because I care to make disciples not only of people outside the church, but also people who are literally sitting in my church and aren't. Right. Yeah. And so that's ideally, I'd like to get rid of the meetings that I have. I'd like to just totally cancel them. But I don't know. It's the change bit. That's where I'm trying to like do the discernment piece of how fast do I push this thing, and the changes that I know should be made. But that's a hard.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so one of the maxims that we'll use is especially like once a team decides they want to go through like a 2-year process of learning how to build a culture of discipleship and mission. One of the things we'll say is that we want to see revolutionary change at an evolutionary pace. Because if you don't do revolutionary change at an evolutionary pace, you end up with a revolution, and revolutions are bloody and people get hurt. And so now I say that, we started way back in 2010, and we've been through a lot of types of change. And, there's been loads of circumstances we've gone through that haven't been a direct result of trying to lead in change, but still, nonetheless, so there's plenty of stories of where people were upset that their apple cart was being kind of like turned over, even at the slower pace we were going. So how about this? When you think about some of those meetings, is there a meeting that seems to be the most ripe for change? Because you're talking about a cultural change. Is there any one meeting in particular where you think, man, that one is the most moldable, the most teachable? How about that? Instead of starting at the bottom where like, man, this one just needs to be gone, that might be revolutionary bloodiness. But like, man, this one is like, I could really see where maybe I could do a couple things and keep the meeting, but change how the meeting runs. Any thoughts on that direction?
Yeah, there's a few with my my leadership team for sure would be the one where I think there's enough place where we can really mold that into more disciple making than just meeting for meeting's sake.
Yeah.
That's the first one that would jump out to mind for sure.
Great.
For me. Yeah.
What do you think that might look like? Any ideas in particular about like, so you take the current standard, it just happened, everybody went, yep, that's our standard meeting. What might be some of the things that you would change to make it more disciple oriented?
For me, it'd probably be more time and actual like prayer together.
Love it.
Like listening to what God might be saying. And
Yes.
and I'm a fairly type A driven kind of person. So I normally drive those meetings fairly hard and fairly quickly.
Yeah.
And it would be more probably saying, what are you sensing God asking us to do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
at
good.
least off the top of my head. That's what I think.
Awesome. Yep. I think that's a natural place to go. I think another one would be to go to the direction of the word, so like, okay, as disciples, the word is valuable. As disciples, prayer is valuable. As leading disciples, we want this to be something that we learn to do together versus just getting through the business of it. So yeah, I think that's awesome that you're identifying, here's my natural makeup and how I might approach that. And that could, work against it that way. Do you have any good examples from your past about where a meeting infused with waiting prayer like that has happened? Do you have any examples, or is that an idea, but I don't know exactly how I would build that blueprint?
Yeah. My I just changed like this in the past year a bit. My previous church, I was able to transition them to being more missional and actually part of our community. So I've seen some of that and been a part of it. It's just at a different scale now. So that's the So I do have some of that I can pull on. Yeah,
that's good. Yeah, so I think I'll probably pull back off of pushing you a little bit further, but I could see where finding it again, if this is revolutionary change at an evolutionary pace, a lot of times it's easier to be able to move a ship that has its sails up, And so if you've got a meeting in particular, because again, you're looking at, am I leading in a way that encourages spiritual consumerism? I don't want to do that. And I want to prune some things. It may not mean cut the whole branch off, but I'm going to take this branch and I'm going to shape it, produce more fruit. And it sounds like, at least, it could be you were just spitballing, but prayer might be a way to begin to make it shaped more like Jesus, and finding ways to do that. And again, that might be counter, maybe intuitive to the natural way that you would go about it, but it does sound like you've got experience to draw from, to take, especially when you've got this big ship that you're wanting to turn. Take the parts that are most moldable and flexible, get some good wins going that way that might be able to feed into other sectors of the whole idea. Any kind of final thoughts or questions or ideas before I turn to one more person?
No, I like that idea of revolutionary change at an evolutionary pace. I think that's a good line for anybody in ministry.
Yeah, right. And especially somebody type A and driven who will drive things. But then also who has this, it's hard for me to say no, because those things, oh man, can create a predicament that way. But I'm signing up for a revolution, but I'm going to do it in this in this way that's going to be subtle. So that's awesome. Emily, I'd love to turn to you next, because I know that your question was similar to Andrew's. Am I leading in a way that encourages spiritual consumerism? And you're talking about the ladies that you're leading, how you're going about it. What's going on in your mind after hearing me talk with Andrew and you're thinking about it a little bit more?
Sure. So I think what I need to do, I think what God has been telling me, even just listening through what Andrew was saying, is that I need to start bringing some challenge to the table with some of the women that are helping me lead, because I know them, and I've been working hard to be a servant toward them and see the areas that were hurt before during our transition period.
Mm-hmm.
And now that we're here, I think it's time for me to start pushing a little bit and seeing what happens.
That's good. Any particular area where you think, here's where I'm going to push first? What might increasing challenge look like to that group?
Yeah. So currently I'm sort of just leading the entire upstairs set for our children's ministry. And so I think just start setting standards for them to be a part of that, and to have a consistent role in it, I think would be the first challenge.
That's good. I'm even noticing in there too that it might be that you lean with invitation first. Like, hey, I would love to have you be with me. Come hang out with me. So before you put responsibility directly on them, like, come be with me. I want you to see what I'm doing, because there's ways that you're doing things that are unique and different than maybe what they're used to, so that they could, and then dialogue with them. But with the idea, you've got a long-term vision. These ladies will do what I'm doing right now. That's the revolution. But the evolutionary pace is going to be, I want them to watch me first. I want them to ask questions about it. I want to make sure that they're understanding why I'm doing what I'm doing. Right. And then begin to, hey, next week, why don't you do this part? That might be a model that kind of gets you the same way, but without just, you didn't say this, and Emily wouldn't deliver it like this. But hey, ladies, it's time. Step up. It's time to show up. Sometimes we can jump a little bit too quick into all of that. So give me some thoughts on all of that. Any names in particular, too, that are coming to mind?
Sure. Yeah. So Senia and Mark and Julie Denny and Cindy Grimm. I think there's just a group that I think has used this opportunity as like a time to sort of step back and see what's going to happen within the transition of children's ministry. And I think just inviting them back in now that. Mm-hmm.
Good. And I think too, you might feel like, man, I don't have all of the answers. And I think that's okay, because some of the things that you're doing, and maybe this is something that you and I can unpack at another time too, but like there are some things that I'm watching you do that you're doing intuitively, and you might be doing it intentionally, but they're really, really good. And so that might be help for you to realize again, oh, what I'm doing intuitively is actually really important. I need them to be shaped by these ideas. And so maybe we can remind me of that. Let's talk that kind of stuff through, because I'd love to help you tease that out a little bit more. But yeah, start inviting those ladies and gentlemen into this. And I think add Suzette to your list as well. I would encourage you, invite her into that, which again, you've got strong leaders who have a lot of experience as well, but still lead in there, because they will follow your lead in the midst of it. Like I had one more question, but it's escaping me. Is this something, I guess maybe to even make it a little bit more concrete, is this something you see happening this Sunday or next Sunday, or put a timeline on it now?
Yeah, well, I think today I'm going to start. I think nice. I'm going to go meet with some of them.
Love it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Good stuff. JR, with the last 3 minutes that we've got here, what I was going to do with everybody else on, I knew Arnetta needed to jump off, and then I just saw an email come through from Andrew that he must have had to jump off a little bit early. Why don't you, on yours, just because I was going to have us kind of like pause, reflect, what is it that the Lord is saying to us? But in light of that, I'd love to just give you the space. So is my way of life shaped by church culture or Jesus' way of life? You're identifying kind of this caught in the middle. maybe go in that direction of pruning. Anything while you heard these other people talk about things that need to be pruned or shaped? Anything coming to mind in that way for you?
I don't know that what necessarily needs to be pruned. I, I'm like I shared before. This is my. I've only been here for 16 months, and I've been trying to just earn the people's trust where there wasn't trust before, and establish relationship before I established a lot of change. There were some things that immediately had to be done. That no, we're doing this today, and so. But as far as I don't know what else needs to be pruned. I'm just trying to get this body from the 19th century. There's still my office manager came at me with a floppy disk saying there's no way I can download this. That's why I'm serious. And
wow. Okay.
And I tried to say, hey, we need a new computer. You need to get a new computer. Well, this one's working fine, Pastor. And I'm just going, okay. And I realized that I needed something new. So I have this Apple thing in front of me that I'm totally lost, but I'm like, I got to learn. And so
that's great.
But they saw that and they're like, that's just too much. And then 2 weeks ago, that computer that I told them that they needed to replace because they weren't, they didn't want to listen to me. The blue screen of death, done. And so now the office manager has an Apple in front of him now. And so,
nice.
But I had to, instead of just, demanding, hey, get a computer now, I had to let it happen, and for them to see that what I was sharing with them, I wasn't just trying to spend money, and I wasn't just trying to, be like the kid next, the people next door.
Yeah.
That what I was talking about that we needed was a necessity, and so
absolutely, that's great. And I think in a way too, I'm thinking about our own journey here. So I'm on an Apple product, Emily's on an Apple product. We've now fully converted where we're all on Apple devices, but that's been multiple years in the mix. And I hear you, I had the resistance, but I'm used to, so I didn't quite have floppy disk. That's a unique one. That could get pruned away right there. Thank the Lord that's pruned, right? But I did have people but I know how to use this device, and kind of like what you're saying, I don't know how to use this new one. There's little bits of difference. And so I definitely had to lead with some direct, here's how I want it to happen, but also with some invitation. That's okay. I know it's going to be hard. I'm doing this too. So it's kind of nice that you're leading by example. You're in a sense, over your head, so to speak, with the new technology. Well, hey, I'm in it with you too. Let's learn this together. So, and that could be a real practical one, because the day and age that we live in, a lot of discipleship, like we're right now, can happen this way. And so, that's good stuff. All right, guys, why don't you take some time right now to be able to just pause. We'll take just a few minutes beyond the hour and take about 60 seconds and just go to the Lord. What does it seem like he's saying to you? And then we'll wrap up by just sharing that. And that'll be good for today, okay? So Holy Spirit, come. We've been talking about Edict of Milan and consumerism and Apple computers and ministry leadership. Would you help sift through all of this stuff and show us the things that you really seem to be leading us in for today so we can take some action steps? Come, Lord, come. About 60 seconds, guys, and then we'll share. All right. So for me, I think the conversation is helping me again to have perspective. That'll happen a lot of times, especially in a new call like this. So I'm remembering again what it was like to start from scratch and go, man, we got to change this culture. And I think that perspective is helping me to see where we do have a life and a church that is much more shaped like Jesus. Because I can easily be frustrated about where we are right now. But I'm seeing like, oh man, that conversation I had there, that person who's leading that person who's thinking this way, those things are radically different than they were years ago. And so I think that's been really helpful. So I just felt like the Lord was celebrating a lot of things that I'm seeing happen around me right now. Emily, what's the Lord seem to be putting upon your heart?
Yeah, I just think through all of this, I think he was just reminding me why he called me to do this in the first place, and just to remember that. And I think fear and hesitation are always my first go-tos in thinking of something new, like in something where I'm going to have to do challenge, or a trend, something change is going to have to happen again. But yeah, I think he was just gently reminding me of the goal, and that this is going to be a family of families, and that this is what he's called me to do. And
that's great. Yep.
Yeah.
Reminding me of the call. That's good, because he's going to form things out of it. JR, what about you? What does it seem like the Lord's impressing upon you?
I would say that I need to be equipped. I can't, and then in the same term, being equipped, be able to speak into this body in a language that they'll get it.
Yeah.
It does no good for me to be, and I'm just using this as an example, to speak nothing but Apple when when all I understand is PC.
Yeah.
So and there's, although there's similarities, there's a vast difference.
Yeah.
But, so I guess equipping me but still being able to speak a language that this body will understand and say, and they'll get it.
Yeah. That's good. Love it. That's what Jesus did, right? He used parables that were agricultural in nature because he was speaking to an agrarian culture. And so he took what they knew and said, I'm going to tell you about the kingdom of God using these ideas. And he just articulated and contextualized things that were hard to understand in ways that were accessible for them. That's awesome. That's brilliant right there. All right, guys. Well, thanks for jumping into the deep end for huddle number 1. What we'll do is you'll feel this rhythm kind of play out as we continue to move on. We'll wrestle with 2 questions. Today we really just did 1, but what's God saying to us, and then what will we do about it? So one thing you could do is go, okay, well, if God's saying this, what will I do this week about it? That's kind of where I'll start leading us, and we'll get that rhythm down, all right? All right, Emily, can you stay on just for a little bit? Awesome. All right, see you, JR. Take care.